as much as the history, he's also interested in genealogy. So he's done it. Loves his genealogy, and I'd love to hear some of his presentations on genealogy on the historically speaking. He's a wonderful historian, a wonderful person, and he's also the pastor of the church here. So thank you for allowing us to come, and we made it convenient for you, I hope.
Yes, thank you. I'm still my church clothes, so.
That's right. So we asked Michael he knows about our group, we asked him to do a topic of historical interest that he thought would be interested, and he came up with symbols for the new republic. So without further ado, Michael,
Thank you.
Please take over.
So about 10 months ago, Whitney got a hold of me because of my Otter Valley connections and asked me if I would be here today. And I wasn't sure what I was going to talk about, but a safe blanket topic would have been adventures of a U.S. history teacher. And in my 35 years, I had wonderful adventures, wonderful opportunities to light the spark with kids. I'll say more about that in a moment. The frustration sometimes came with the bureaucracy. And I'll tell you two related stories in the year that I was the teacher of the year. That was a wonderful experience. It was exhausting. I was 40 days on the road while still maintaining a student load of 120 students and 5 preps. I've been on this Protonics, controlling the hydrochloric acid in my stomach ever since, because it was just, it's like being at a wedding. You were constantly on top of things. So one of the things that happened that year, I had been working with teachers from New Hampshire, Vermont, and Maine on developing a United States history curriculum, because we can never seem to decide what is important for kids to learn. And if it's any wonder at times the kids don't know X and Y, is we don't make it clear what we want them to learn. So in the 7th year of this, we were meeting in Montpelier on April 1st, 2003. I remember the date well. There were 17 teachers there from various schools, and the person who was the chair of the committee stood up and said, I couldn't do this through an email, but the state has pulled out the plug from this, and your services are no longer required because we have to adopt the new literacy initiative. So go home. I burst out laughing because I thought it was an April Fool's joke. It wasn't. At that same time, I had come back from a meeting of teachers from all over the country in Dallas. I came home and I had a letter from our, as it was called, Department of Education at the time. And the letter said, Dear Mr. Dwyer, we are unable to determine if you are qualified to be teaching social studies. Well, I thought, what is this? So I called and I said, well, what is your problem? I had been teaching at that point for 20 years. I had a degree in American history. Oh, we're looking at your transcript. You know, social studies is an umbrella of various disciplines, and we don't see that you ever took a course in geography or civics. I said, okay, let's talk about civics. Do you know the state standards in civics, 6.11 to 6.17 of the learning opportunities? I wrote them. Well, I'm sorry, Mr. Dwyer. We cannot give you credit for that because you did not earn undergraduate credit. So this went on, and so finally they said, well, we'll consider you for a highly qualified teacher if you take a course in economics. Well, I have been avoiding economics for most of my life. Judy, I'm trying to think of her last name, from Castleton, put a course together. I persevered through the course, never taught economics, but I got through, and they said, no, we still can't say that you are highly qualified in teaching U.S. history because I can't remember what they said that I needed going back to civics. They said the only thing that you can do to prove that you are highly qualified is to take the praxis exam. So here we are, I've been teaching 22 years and they want me to take the praxis. So on the day that I signed up for the praxis, it was a day in early June. I had been working for the College Board grading European history exams in Lincoln, Nebraska. The plane got stuck in Newark. I didn't make it home. I missed the testing opportunity. I could not take the praxis. So I contacted ETS in Princeton and I said, surely you can understand the irony of my predicament. I am working for you, grading AP exams. Vermont is trying to determine if I am qualified. I had to pay for the praxis exam. Will you at least roll me over into the next exam date? Sure, we'll do that for you. I go over to Castleton on my birthday, August 4th. There were 6 kids who burst out laughing. They were my students. They said, Mr. Dwyer, what are you doing here? And I also was subjected to, I'm sorry, you cannot bring a water bottle into the testing site. You cannot bring any materials in with you. So I took the exam and I came home and George said to me, well, how did you do? And I said, I think there was 1 or 2 questions I didn't know. And I thought, well, whatever will be, will be. So 7 weeks later, 2 envelopes come in the mail. One looked like a government check, and it had a number on it, and it was $199. I didn't know what that meant. And George said, well, I think that's good. So then I opened the other envelope, and of course, it was that I was on the 99th percentile. So finally, at that point, the letter went out that I was highly qualified to be teaching social studies, and all that has gone by the wayside. So let's talk more about the positive things and what I want to share with you. One of the things that I think made me successful in working with kids is they know I loved it, I believed it, I practiced it. I would not allow kids to sit doing empty activities like playing with their phones and so on. I had a well-stocked classroom library. I would make sure that they read. Kids don't read enough. There's too much of this, and they think that's research. The other aspect is, whatever I taught, I wanted to connect kids to their own past, whether they are the grandchildren of recent immigrants or 5 generations back, an ancestor fought in the Civil War or the American Revolution. And that really lit the spark with some kids when they realized that someone in their family played a role in one of our major events. One of the last funny experiences, it was my last year of teaching, and it was a World War I unit that I was teaching. And I said to the kids, is anyone in your family World War I veteran? So Hunter Birchmore, whose family owned the nursery up here, the Sabatinis, before it was sold, said, well, you know, Mr. Dwyer, there's a helmet on our television set. How about if I bring it in? And maybe you can tell me about it. So he brought the helmet in, and I said, it is a World War I helmet. I said, who could it be? I said, okay, let's see what I can do. So he said, well, I'll come during lunch and you can research for me. So I found by pulling information out of him that it was his great-great-grandfather's World War I helmet. I found his World War I draft registration. The kid thought this was the coolest thing. He took the paper and actually slipped it into the cover of his loose-leaf binder. So 2 weeks later, his dad comes during parent conferences and he said to me, what the hell have you done to my kid? When a parent comes in, you know, you think, oh my goodness, am I indeed doo-doo? So he said, you know, my son and I were out on a trip buying grain somewhere in East Montpelier, and my son turned to me and said, Dad, wouldn't you like to go with me to visit your grandfather's grave? He is a World War I veteran. So that's the wonderful part of when you realize that kids are going to remember something because they have had that connection to history. The other thing that I was very lucky to do in my 35 years is teach history in an integrated way. So that in MSJ, I taught simultaneously American literature and American history at the same time. So the two fed in one to the other. At Otter Valley, I was part of the American Studies program for 30 years. And the joy of that is that it really tapped into having kids build a visual vocabulary of important ideas, symbols, people, and to make them aware that all they have to do in our community is to open their eyes and see the beauty of the architecture and what it stands for. So thinking about what you do in this era that you work so hard to bring the history to, it's a highly important but understudied aspect of American history, because you have to understand who we were as a colony before the Revolution, the impact of the French and Indian War, and how that really led to the American Revolution. Because when you think about democracy in the 20th century, democracy that has taken hold and democracy that has failed, democracy best endures in an environment when there is a long-standing tradition of free representation and democratic institutions. And many of our institutions that we value, even aspects of town meeting, go back to those early days of the colonies before the Revolution, because we were among the freest society in the world. Not a perfect society, but just think of the world at the time of the Crown Point Road. France was an autocracy. Russia, people were virtually slaves. Most of Eastern Europe, they were serfs. And England was hardly free or democratic in the 18th century. And those are really, it was that spirit of democracy and independence that was the underpinning of what became our republic. And it really is a miraculous thing of how our republic came about, from the American Revolution to the establishment of the government. And what I would like to share with you is a visual vocabulary of how quickly we developed symbols that appealed to the nation. In 1783, we had the design of the Great Seal of the United States. And we have here the eagle, which has been a feature of many monarchies. It was part of the Romanov crest, it was part of the Hohenzollern crest. And you see here that the eagle holds in its one talon the branch of peace and the sheaves of war. And those are the two things together that a country must do to endure. You also have the e pluribus unum, out of many, one. And I say that often because we have to remember that out of the disparate elements of our society and how we disagree on things, ultimately we are one nation, indivisible. And we have in a Masonic star, we have the original 13 stars of the 13 colonies. And on the back side, and take out your dollar bill, because there's so much history on your dollar bill, here we have a pyramid. So it's the adoption of a Masonic symbol, tremendous interest in Egypt at this time with the pyramid. You have at its base in Roman numerals 1776, Novus Ordo Secularum. All literate people knew some Latin at the time. A new order of the ages. Annuit Sheptis, which loosely translated with the Masonic eye is, he has smiled on our undertaking. So there is this heavenly benevolence that you see looking down on us. This is a 1st century Roman coin of a minor goddess called Libertas. And this is going to be someone who really transforms our early currency. Here we have a liberty figure. Long before the French Revolution, Phrygian caps were a symbol of slaves who were revolting. So here we have an early coin It has the goddess Libertas, the Liberty of America, 1776. So we have the female depiction of liberty and the Phrygian cap that you think of as so much a part of the French Revolution. The Phrygian cap is on a stick. You can see it better here. The Liberty sent from 1796, the female depiction of liberty with the Phrygian cap. So this is something that, as this coin goes to everyone in the colonies, we're driving home that symbol of liberty.
What kind of a cap?
A Phrygian cap.
Phrygian.
So, Phrygian. So it's Phrygia, and Phrygia was a region in Asia Minor, and it has to do, I think, with a revolt of slaves in this region, and they wore these caps. So this symbol was revived at the time of our revolution and also in the French Revolution. So that became one of the symbols of the French Revolution when people were wearing these red hats. Now we know the model for this depiction of liberty here, and it's based on a lost sketch of Anne Billing Bingham, who was sketched in pastel by Gilbert Stuart, and she was the model for our Liberty Cent at that time. And once again, the symbolism which really preceded, this is the Declaration of the Rights of Man for the French Revolution. This is 1789, but they are drawing from our revolution 13 years before. So you have the depiction of liberty on the left, the goddess Liberty breaking the chains of oppression. You also have the angelic figure here pointing to that seeing eye that we see on the Great Seal of the United States, that once again, this embodiment of liberty and the rights of man is something that has divine inspiration. And again, an image, a huge image of a Phrygian cap from the time of the French Revolution. Now, we know that in 1803, due to the Louisiana Purchase, the United States doubled. So in one of the images that we have about how we are embracing this American expansionism, we have the eagle, which is much better a national symbol, because you probably know that Benjamin Franklin wanted the turkey as our national bird. I'm not sure, Thanksgiving would be the same if we had adopted the turkey as the national bird. But why do we have the eagle? Because the eagle is the symbol of power. It is the bird of Zeus. So here we have the eagle. Under my wings, everything prospers. And here we have a depiction of a liberty type goddess with a white Phrygian hat, liberty bringing education to the people. So you think of, depending on our section of the country, New England had a very high literacy rate, not so much to the same degree in the South. So here we have this association of liberty bringing education to people. And again, another early depiction of liberty, the goddess. You have the bird here, kind of a Zeus-like figure. You also see in the background the Phrygian cap and the American flag, all of these things coming together. I love this depiction of an American sailor around the time of the War of 1812. We owe allegiance to no crown. We know that one of the issues of the War of 1812 was the impressment of American sailors. And here we have the proud sailor who is bestowed with kind of a divine grace from the Liberty figure. So there is the Liberty figure. She's got her Phrygian cap, and also we have a laurel crown for the great undertaking that he is going to engage in to keep our freedom. Now, our national hero, well-founded and well worth reconsidering. This is the earliest portrait of George Washington, 1772, painted by his friend Charles Wilson Peale, and he is wearing his Virginia militia uniform. And I think we have to remember that George Washington had his first military experience, not very successful, in the French and Indian War. And here he is, lovely images of Peel, of him and Martha. And during the years, those difficult years like through Valley Forge, Martha had this miniature and he had the one of her. And he kept this with him at his side through the Revolution. And as we are starting to realize that we need a larger-than-life unifying hero, here is George Washington. There's a cannon for you, right there. I can get my little, that's a nice looking cannon right there. This is after the Battle of Princeton, and Charles Willson Peel probably exaggerated. George Washington was a massive man. He was probably 6'3", very, very powerful, but certainly Peel's choice in making a full-life portrait of him like this is emphasizing Washington's power and strength. And as we start to see more images of Washington here, we see him depicted in a variety of ways. And one of the great enduring aspects of George Washington, beyond his military prowess, is what he did to establish the precedent of peaceful transitions of power. Because twice he was offered almost unlimited power. So when the Society of the Cincinnati wanted to make him almost a king during the time of the Articles of Confederation, he turned them down. He presided over the Constitutional Convention. And then when he could have gone on with no limit on presidential terms, at the conclusion of his second term, at the beginning of 1797, he said, "I've done it, it's time for me to go home to Mount Vernon." And here we have a beautiful bust by the French sculptor Houdin of George Washington, another portrait of him by Edward Savage. And this one is, I think, a very, very worthwhile painting for us to contemplate the Washington family and the complexity of the early days of our republic. Because, of course, you have George and Martha. And remember that George had no children with Martha. She was a widow with 2 children by her first marriage, and both of those children, who were named Custis, died young. And we have Martha's 2 grandchildren that were raised as George Washington's children. Nellie became the grandmother of Mrs. Robert E. Lee. So there is the connection with the Custis Lee Mansion in Washington in Arlington. At this point, they are looking at the plan for the capital city, the city of Washington, D.C. And in the background here is George Washington's manservant named York. And there is a wonderful new book. It is by, I'm trying to think of who wrote Bunker Hill. It's a new book on George Washington that talks about how we still need to understand his heroic nature in the context of his time. And yes, he was a slave owner, but his manservant York was really part of his family, part of his own household. Again, many statues of Washington here, images, military. Our dollar bill, Gilbert Stuart, the Athenaeum portrait, was engraved, and we carry it all in our pockets. Another portrait by Stuart. And this one is kind of stilted because Washington never posed for this. And Washington portraits were in such demand that Gilbert Stuart had the head and he just painted the body to go with it. And this is just, sometimes you go to fairs and you put your face in those things and someone would take a picture. That's the sense of this portrait, because it's not proportionate for the dimensions of George Washington's true stature. And again, images of Washington proliferated all over the colonies. And I dare say that most homes probably had a lithograph image of Washington in them. And it isn't just what happens with images, but here you have a fancy clock, probably made in France. You've got Washington, you've got the bird of Zeus, you've got all these symbols of the early republic. And Washington died, undoubtedly killed by his doctors who kept bleeding him after he developed this throat infection. But he died shortly before Christmas in 1799. So as the new century came around, January 1st, 1800, the word went out about the passing of George Washington. People were really conscious of how this was the end of an era. So we have these wonderful mourning pictures of Washington here. And again, we have images of the apotheosis of Washington. So he really gets made into a godlike figure, as we can see here. And this portrait is by Rembrandt Peale, painted in 1835, so 36 years after the death of Washington. And Washington is now ensconced in a Roman circular, like you would find busts of Roman emperors. And this portrait of a semi-dressed George Washington was supposed to be displayed in the Capitol, and people just didn't like the bare-chested George. So for a lot of years, it was put in the basement of the Capitol. And finally, in the 1960s, it was moved to the Smithsonian, where it lives today. But you can really see George, who goes from being a human being, is now made into a Zeus-like figure. In this painting of Washington crossing the Delaware by the German painter Emanuel Leutze is really at the epitome of the making Washington into this powerful mythic figure. And this painting, which lives in the Metropolitan Museum of Art, is easily the size of this wall here. And when I took my American Studies students there for a trip, there were these little kids from Puerto Rico, or a Spanish-speaking school, and they ran into the room, and one of the little kids said, "Esta Jorge Washington!" There he is. The kids were so excited to see this painting. And this is Charles Wilson Peale's self-portrait. He's the man, of course, who painted all these images of Washington. He had a museum on the second floor of Independence Hall. And as an old man, he paints this portrait of the artist in his museum. And the reason that I'm showing you this portrait is that Grant Wood, whom all of you know for painting American Gothic, did a very whimsical painting of Pa, I Cannot Tell a Lie.
No.
There is no basis for that in history, but here you have Washington, the Gilbert Stuart head on the little body. You have the Father Washington here, and George reputedly saying, "I cannot tell a lie, I cut down the cherry tree." And this man here, and again, you can see the relationship of how these two paintings speak to one another. This man is Parson Weems, because Parson Weems is the man who wrote the very exaggerated biography of George Washington a year after his death that has the story of the cherry tree in it, etc. So that is what I have for you folks, just as a way of understanding how our country needed symbols, adopted symbols, and how these symbols became part of the culture of our time. So today, what do we want from our students today? I think that kids today need a firm grounding and understanding the Constitution. Civics should be a required class for all students to take. I think that in the best of all possible worlds, every 8th grade child should have a trip to Washington, D.C. to see some of our monuments, to understand how important they are. And, sometimes I wonder what is up at times with our agency of education. In 2016, I was taking a class at Castleton, one of the last that I needed to keep my license through retirement. And John Peterson, who many of you know, a wonderful teacher from Rutland High School, he said, "You're not going to believe this." And I said, "What have they done now?" Our agency of education no longer required U.S. history as a graduation requirement. So, what did they replace it with? It's up to each school district to define the criteria of global citizenship. What does that mean? So there was a report in the Rutland Herald several weeks ago about the state of history. And I think most people teaching history do have sound training, do have good ideas, but sometimes the infrastructure does not support the time that is needed for kids to thoroughly understand history. In the years that I served as the social studies department head at Otter Valley, I made sure that all kids had 2 years of United States history. They needed to understanding all the colonial underpinnings, the understanding of what made a republic, grounding that in some constitutional history, and up through the Civil War, and a well-established foundation of what the Civil War was fought for. And then in the second year, from the Civil War, the end of the Civil War to the present. But too often, a grounding in history gets crowded out by other things. And I think we, as we hold schools accountable for the curriculum in school, we need to make sure that the curriculum focuses on kids really getting a thorough grounding in history. And with that, and I love preaching to the choir, that's why I like my job upstairs as well. So I certainly welcome comments, questions. Yes?
Thank you for assuring that kids get history, because I know at Castleton they've eradicated history as a core requirement also. And that's scary because we know Mao Zedong erased Chinese history
And replaced it with his own.
It replaced it. So that's why I think as I said earlier, gatherings like this are so important to keep history together. And you mentioned the symbols being very important at the inception of our burgeoning republic. And thank you for using the word republic, not democracy. People throw out democracy not realizing we're a republic. But my father got a book years ago about Noah Webster and why he did a dictionary. It's to help, the same thing the Signals did, is to help this burgeoning republic codify itself. Mm-hmm. And because if you look at documents, people are using all sorts of different words and spellings, but the dictionary helped bring it all together. And I think that goes right parallels with the symbols as well.
One of the things that, and I was sad for most of my last year of teaching because I knew it was time for me to retire, not knowing that I would be here. There are a lot of things as we end one chapter of our lives. We don't know what's coming next, but I was saddened by, I knew it would be the end of certain things. And one of the things that on my literature side I firmly espoused was a canon of literature. Works that are important enough for kids to know and experience. And I think that is subject to change, but I really like what Hirsch did some 35 years ago of establishing some benchmarks for cultural literacy. And, the visual piece of this, I can tell you that as I hear from kids and have made friends with a lot of them on Facebook now that I'm not teaching them anymore, they remember this. They remember going to the museum. They remember standing in front of the Brandon Town Hall and realizing that the adoption of that style of architecture reminiscent of Greece, that these would be temples of democracy. And I think these are things that we grew up with because that we had much more cultural commonality than we do now. And right now, I am really fearful for our culture because we've got too many warring factions and not coming to consensus on what we want our children to know. We'll all do our bit, I think, to advise. I gave it my all when I was doing it, but I can't look back now, and be like Lot's wife and turn into a pillar of salt. But I think that all of us, to keep our schools strong, need to hold schools accountable for what children are being taught. Yes?
And that's a real struggle. From outside, it looks to me like there's a kind of silent competition going on. For the last 15 years ago, it's been STEM, STEM, STEM. And for the last 40 years, the test scores for students seem to be just trending down, 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 even more so after COVID. So, when you have your elective, your once or twice a week course and stuff, they're more likely to take that out of social studies class than they are from one of the STEM, so science, technology, engineering, and mathematics.
The other thing too, and I know I'm dating myself, but I would say to kids, I want you to learn it. You're going to keep it here. Put your hands on your head. You are not an Etch-a-Sketch. Don't shake and have it go away tomorrow. But I think that one of the battles that I had, even with the former superintendent, is we don't need to know, he said. We need to merely teach access. Now, I always sat at faculty meetings here in the front of the room. And even though he's watching this, he can't hurt me now. He's retired and living in that's what he's saying. But when he was saying this, I must have been twitching. He said, "You don't agree with me, do you?" And I said, "I do not agree with you, sir."
Yeah.
Because it's not just about access, about deeply felt knowledge that people hold on to. And it became a game almost with my students because I really wanted them to have it here forever. Not to, recite all the presidents in order or things like that, but there are some things that you have to have here because you can be so easily swayed by what is on your phone. And even as an example, in some recent history articles, someone called a person to task because that person used Wikipedia, History.com, and not solid sources. And this is something that we need to get back to. So what do? We do what you do. You keep history alive. You gather. This is a very important thing. Yesterday, I attended the Vermont Society of Mayflower Descendants meeting. I've been a proud member for 41 years. I retired from all my jobs 25 years ago. I needed a break, but when the elder died, they called me back, and now that I'm old enough, I guess I could be the elder. But it's really wonderful to have people come together for a common purpose and to have that thread of continuity that runs through our history. And even though we have our shortcomings in this republic, we need to make sure that our children understand these ideals. What were these high aspirations that lifted us up and have held us together? And I think that, when we erase history, that is a dangerous thing. And we all have opinions about the unnaming of the Mead Chapel in Burlington, and former Governor Douglas is advocating that. But the danger in that is not so much judging Mead for his support of eugenics, but let's turn that into an opportunity for exploration. By unnaming him and wiping his name off that, we move that aside. You know, back in 1977, they were revising or restoring the train station in Atlanta. And one of the entrances to the train station had colored over it. And of course, we wanted to eradicate that. And Andrew Young said, no, that has to stay up because that is a reminder not to hurt people in the present, but we have to acknowledge that as part of our history and not wipe it away. Yeah, you can tell I'm getting wound up.
Just want to say, no, absolutely. That's part of history and being thick-skinned, because you can't be insulted at every turn. But they're learning situations. Well, if it was wrong, let's not do it again. Anyway, we're preaching to the.
I know.
But that's good, because sometimes we have these feelings, and if they're not affirmed, we start thinking, well, maybe we're not right, but I think we are. I think we're right makes right.
You know, we're all Americans, and we all have something to bring to the table. And I know that the celebration for 400 years of the landing at Plymouth has been very, very controversial. But as my father would say to me when he realized that I was doing all this research on my mother's side of the family, he said, the Pilgrims belong to all of us. And even though my people were back in Ireland when this happened, they are part of the national ideal that inspired us all. And I think that's what we need to keep doing, is to hold on to those things that help define who we are today, and not do this to the things that we don't like.
Yeah.
So thank you, folks, and I'll be here to continue.
So you don't have to leave. Thank you. Have a good rest of the day.